Hey folks, it's Mr. MegaManFan, and for this episode I'm testing out 4 Famicom games that I picked up from Japan on my analog NT Mini Noir. Now if you like this video, please subscribe, leave a comment, a thumbs up, share the video. Any of those things help out the channel a lot. We're starting with Lode Runner, which curiously was never released in North America. Even though, as I often say about these type of games, localization would have been incredibly easy, especially given this was a PC computer game in North America to begin with that was ported to the Famicom. So I remember it, this started out as an Apple II game because I remember playing it in school, but it also came to Commodore 64, Atari ST, and IBM PC, and probably just about darn near everything that existed back then. Lode Runner was a very popular game, owing perhaps to the simple, easy to understand nature of it. You're being chased by creatures, you're trying to collect gold. If they collect the gold before you do, you can drop them in a pit and pick up the gold that they drop, or you can create the holes to drop from one platform to another. Sometimes that's the only way you can solve a level, because the gold will be hidden in an area that you can't just walk to. You have to dig your way through it, and then you have to dig a hole to get out of it, and if you don't move fast enough, the holes fill in, and you can, of course, accidentally trap yourself in Lode Runner. So it's a puzzle game as well as an action game. There's a lot to mesmerize and confound you, but there's also a lot to learn and adapt to, which makes it a very repeat playable game. You can get endless amounts of fun out of Lode Runner, not just playing the stages that are there, but in the computer versions you can also make your own stages and save them to a floppy disk and challenge your friends to play them. Now, there might have been a way to do that with the Famicom, but obviously I can't do that with the NT Mini Noir. There's no tape drive or any such device that I can hook up to it, so no. At best, there might be a Famicom Disk System version which would save it to the disk, but I don't have a Famicom Disk System, and I'm not even worrying about that because I just want to play the levels that are built into Lode Runner, and as it turns out, it's an incredibly easy game to dump. It's a Mapper Zero game, a basic NROM game, so it'll work on just about anything. You can dump it with the basic NROM in Copy NES Mini, or just use Copy NES on your PC and a compatible USB adapter with the Famicom cartridge loaded in. However you do it, you can see that it works off the SD card, and it also worked on my MacBook when I took the SD card out and used it with OpenEMU. But we'll get more into that at the end of this video, because there was one game that was a little bit tricky. Now, Spelunker was tricky, but not tricky to dump. It's just tricky in the fact that there are very, very unforgiving physics at play here. If you're trying to make a tiny little jump and you're not exactly at the right level, you take fall damage and die. If you fall down a tiny little hole, you take fall damage and die. You bounce backward off an obstacle in your way, you take fall damage and die. You jump off a rope, you take fall damage and die. It's maddening. I get that I could become accustomed to it over a long enough span of time and it wouldn't be so bad, but the difficulty curve when you're used to games like Super Mario Brothers, where the jumping doesn't ever give you fall damage and it's very forgiving on the whole, yeah, Spelunker is not what you'd expect. So if you're gonna import this game, and it is a very cost-effective game, as are all the ones I'm featuring this week, just keep that in mind before you start playing it, that it's not like any other platformer that you've played. Although it would be like games like Spelunky, which were obviously spiritual successors to it. And this one is also an adaptation from computers to home consoles, so maybe the computer versions would be less or more difficult to control than this one, but Unlike Lode Runner, I didn't grow up playing Spelunker on the computer, so I can't really attest to the differences. I can only tell you from my own experience that the Famicom version that I'm playing right now is pretty finicky when it comes to the controls. But at least it's an easy game to dump. It too is Mapper 0, basic Enron, so no problem getting this one off of the cartridge onto the SD card. Although, as I recall, you need the jailbreak to be able to use Copy NES Mini, so maybe I shouldn't say it's that easy. It's that easy if you have a jailbroken analog Mini NT Noir, which is in itself not the most cost-efficient way to go about things. You'd probably be better off having a USB port dumper and a cheap imported copy of the cart. You don't have to go about it the over-the-top way that I did it. In fact, you don't even have to necessarily import it at all. You could just play the ROM on a PC, or you could put it on an EverDrive of some kind and put it in your NES, because with only a few exceptions, Famicom games will work on the NES and vice versa. They may not have the enhanced sound in some cases, and they may have options for using the microphone on the second controller of the Famicom, and sometimes games were reprogrammed when they were brought to North America and there was no mic available. Like famously, in The Legend of Zelda, there's an enemy that you're supposed to yell into the microphone to scare, and the manual even makes reference to that fact, but they simply left that out of the North American port of it because there was no microphone, so they forgot to take it out of the manual, but they most certainly took it out of the game. Makes me wonder if the Famicom Mini, NES Mini, has the microphone, and you can actually do that in The Legend of Zelda on the Famicom Mini. I suspect they went for authenticity, and you can actually do that, but I've never imported one, so I really don't know. And there are probably multiple versions of Zelda available in Japan anyway. There's probably ones that don't even include that feature at all and just copied from the North American version. It does happen. Like Super Mario 2 here was actually Doki Doki Panic there, and they reworked the sprites. So they reverse imported it and brought it over as Super Mario USA and re-released it as part of the Mario franchise there. So it eventually became part of the series, even though originally Doki Doki Panic was very much not. Now, Dragon Quest is one that did get ported to North America as Dragon Warrior. And unless you can patch this ROM, I would suggest getting Dragon Warrior instead. It's certainly going to be the cheapest of the Dragon Warrior games. There were 4 that were released in North America, and Dragon Warrior was so common that I believe they actually gave away copies of it with Nintendo Power. I certainly remember getting a strategy guide as a special issue of Nintendo Power for the game back in the day, but I think some subscribers even got the actual game itself, which would have been no good to me since I didn't have an NES as a kid. But I'm just saying, Dragon Warrior would probably be the least expensive of the 4 NES games in the series you could pick up, and then it would already be localized and you wouldn't have to patch it. But just out of sheer curiosity and the low price it was on sale for from the eBay seller I picked it up, I went ahead and got it, because why not? Sometimes that's the only justification I need. If it's around $1, I already have it, and I'm placing an order from Japan anyway, it's only going to be another 29 cents on the shipping, and you're already paying for the shipping anyway to get it all the way here. So throw in something like Dragon Quest, even if it's not localized, even if you're not going to be able to do much with it. At least you have the novelty of owning both the Japanese and the North American version. And if you're really skillful, maybe you can patch it and play it in English. Or you can just dump the English version from somebody else's cart and call that a patch. I don't know. Do whatever you want. Life's too short for me to worry about how you treat your collection. What you do is up to you. Pocket Zorus was never released in North America, And I would argue probably could have been. It would need a little bit of localization based on the text in some of the menus, but not too much. It's a side-scrolling game where you have a lizard or dragon of some kind who throws boomerangs, and you can put 2 or 3 of them in the air at a time. And as you're scrolling from left to right, you're collecting items, which I assume have some purpose in the game, but mostly they just give you points from what I've seen. And some of these enemies take multiple hits, so you can't just knock them out with one boomerang. You might need as many as you can put into the air at one time. And it just seems like an adventure exploration game where you go up and down these platforms, pick up whatever items you find, defeat whatever enemies you come across. Sometimes you'll enter a secret room where you can choose one of 2 options to collect, and that's really just about all I have to say about Pocketsaurus. And I think it's fun. I don't know how long or how deep of a game it is, or what the ultimate goal is if you have bosses to defeat and objectives to complete, but I look forward to finding out once I get deeper into the gameplay. I just wanted to make sure that it worked and then try to dump it. But unfortunately, Pocketsaurus was the only one of these 4 that I had trouble dumping. It's a Bondi game, so naturally I tried all of the different mappers that I could find for Bondi, but this one appears to be a reverse image of the mapper number 70 on the NES database, which is because of its vertical flip, however you put that when it comes to the coding of it, it gets renamed as mapper 152. And there doesn't seem to be a copy NES mapper for 152, and a lot of guides for copy NES listed as unsupported, so I thought, well, this is going to be trouble. So I tried getting a ROM, which I consider a legal backup since I own the physical game, and I loaded it into the SD card slot of my Analog NT Mini Noir, and it worked kinda, sorta. Like, the gameplay in the upper half of the screen seems exactly the same as the real cartridge, but in the bottom half of the screen, the further you scroll your character from left to right, the more that area that shows you your score and your health, it fills up with garbage data. Like in my case, it fills in with the number 3. It could just be completely random what garbage data fills into it, but that's what I got when I tried to run it off the SD card. However, I suspect that if you loaded this ROM onto an EverDrive, such as the N8 Pro, and put it in your NT Mini Noir or NES or Famicom or anything else like retro USB, I think it would work just fine off the EverDrive. And the reason I believe that is I took the same ROM that I put on the SD card and I tried it in OpenEMU on my MacBook along with all the other games that I dumped. And as you can see from the footage, and I apologize for my microphone stand being in the way there, but I couldn't unclip it from the desk, it does work, and it doesn't fill in with garbage data on the bottom half of the screen. So I suspect that Mapper 152 really is unsupported through the Analog NT Mini Noir. But if you're using an EverDrive or the actual physical cart, that's not going to be a problem because the cart itself will do the work, whether it's the EverDrive or the real thing. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Thanks as always for watching. Leave your feedback on the games that I imported from Japan, what you think of them, and if you want to pick them up yourself, you should be able to find them for under a couple of bucks, maybe even as low as $1 if you get the right seller. So I would definitely recommend Pocketsaurus and Lode Runner. Cautiously recommend Spelunker because it takes a bit of a learning curve. And with Dragon Quest, I would say it's a novelty, but get Dragon Warrior instead.